Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, we speak with Sascha Epp, Staff Officer for Teacher Welfare at the Manitoba Teachers Society. She gets calls from principals who are part of the same teachers union as the teachers, and it's mostly about conflicts and relationships. She describes an advice monster that takes over many of the conversations with principals.
Today's podcast is brought to you by the word advice, from the Old French meaning opinion, view, judgment. Research shows that unsolicited advice is more likely to be ignored or resisted because it can make the recipient feel judged or disempowered. When you give advice, your brain releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. This creates a feel-good sensation, which can make advice givers overestimate the value or necessity of their input, even when it's not helpful. Encouraging people to reflect on their own ideas and solutions often leads to more sustainable and innovative outcomes. That's my advice.
Check out our website, www.restorative.ca, for practical hints that lead with restorative questions. Shelley's away this week, so let's join your hosts, Steve and me, Stan. What kinds of things are principals calling you about most frequently?
It is in relational, it's in conflict, and we caution them not to, because we have to follow our professional code, and that is you direct any criticism to your colleague directly. You don't step over them and go straight to the principal. And so often you have that line up at your door with, concerns. And how many of those should you involve yourself in or exhaust yourself with? And I love to point to, I don't know if you've heard of Michael Bungay Stanier. Look him up. He has an excellent TED Talk, and he speaks about, he calls them advice monsters we have as people. And I think principals have these advice monsters. There's 3 of them. But he basically says we all as humans have this notion of fixing things. And when somebody approaches you with a problem or a scenario, you have this AG reaction, AGH. So advice giving habit. And when you give advice, you get reward. You get reward. And so that's why you like to give the advice. You might feel like a rescuer, you might feel like the expert, or you might have the save it mentality where if I don't rescue everything, it could turn into something else, so I want to save it. So he talks about these 3 advice-giving monsters that get in the way, and his advice is, instead of advice-giving habit, you have awe and what else. And so you always encourage the person coming to you for advice to say, let me hear what your thoughts are. Like, what do you think your solution is here? Let me hear from you first, and then I'll give you my advice if you need it. So you drill down and you keep saying, and what else? And you approach it with awe. And then usually they have a good solution, and you empower them by saying, see, you knew this all along. Run with it. I encourage you to follow what you thought was the right thing to do. And are you open to hearing my feedback? And then offer yours at the end, right? Might minimize the lines at the door and empower your staff to think through their problems.
I love a couple of things that you said there. I just wanted to point out, first of all, that you're asking questions. And then secondly, you ask someone if they want your advice, because so often advice is given without being asked for.
Yes.
And that actually has the potential to set up more antagonistic. No, I wasn't thinking that. And
Yes.
Why are you giving me this advice? And suddenly
Yes.
you've got a more antagonistic type of conversation. So we also would say, yeah, those, starting with questions.
It sounds a very Socratic method where you just
Yes.
keep asking the questions and drilling down, and the person can try and discover for themselves what needs to happen.
Building.
But
Yeah.
it's also related to what you said, much earlier is about listening. We were told, you're the principal, you're in charge, you have to have the solutions. That's your job. And when
Yes.
people come to you, you have to have the solution.
Yes.
And so as soon as somebody walks in the door and says, here's my problem, your first thought is, okay, here's what you need to do. And
Exactly.
that's not what that's the monster where we jump in
Yes.
and give that advice when they haven't even asked for advice. So we have to sit back, and that's the restorative piece. So when you talk about training EIQ, you absolutely can, because 20 years ago I would have been jumping in to give advice. And then after
Yes.
a while I realized, no, I can listen more. I can ask those questions. I can probe their thoughts a bit more.
Mhm.
And eventually, hopefully, they'll come to it. And then really your role is to facilitate that discussion within
Mhm.
themselves, rather than you're not there unless they walk in and say, I have a problem and I need your advice, in which case you can still do the questioning. You don't have to give
Mhm.
it first off, even
Mhm.
though they may have asked for that. So it is a different approach, and it does take a bit more time
It
sometimes.
does.
And I think that's what some people are. If you got a busy day and there's a lineup down the hall and you've got 8 more things that need to be done, and somebody comes in and says, I have a problem, here's what you need to do quickly because I have to be in a meeting in 5 minutes. And so we tend to do that because it's quicker, but it's not necessarily the best way.
Sascha Epp encourages principals to use questioning techniques, for example, and what else, to help staff or parents discover their own solutions. This fosters empowerment and autonomy. A restorative and Socratic approach to leading as a principal emphasizes listening and facilitates self-discovery rather than immediately providing solutions. Find out more about our work with restorative questions like what happened that really do address some very practical how-tos for the many staff at your office door at www.restorative.ca. Listen up is my advice. Don't let the advice monster eat up your time and conversations. At least that's my opinion.